Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. If you are interested in transformational work such as plant medicine, psychedelics, breathwork, meditation, somatic practices, cold exposure, yoga, and more, then my friends, you are in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point, the podcast that is for practitioners as well as people new to transformational work looking curiously for more information and guidance. So if you are new to this type of work, welcome. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I am an integration coach and breathwork facilitator. I've also been meditating for about 20 years and do some mindfulness instruction as well. So this podcast brings you leaders in the fields of transformational work, whether that's psychedelics and plant medicine work, breath work, or a myriad of other types of modalities. And my goal with this podcast is to not only introduce you to new modalities and practices, but help spark your curiosity to go out and actually practice them. So I hope you enjoy today's episode of the show. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. My guest today is psychedelic integration coach Erin Doumert. And Erin and I have an awesome conversation that revolves around the meaning of integration, how preparation is just as important to the integration process as what happens after your medicine journey is done. And we also dive into the topic of trauma and being trauma informed in the medicine space, the importance of safety around that, and get into using the breath and some other techniques to work with that. So really enjoyed hearing more about Erin. She's an awesome coach. She's also in my mastermind coaching program that I'm going through for Beth Weinstein. And just really happy to bring you this episode, and I hope you enjoy it as well. So welcome to the Vital Point podcast, the podcast where we talk about all different aspects of transformational practice, from breath work to psychedelics, ice baths, meditation, you name it. If it's about transformation, we've probably talked about it here. And my guest today is psychedelic integration coach Erin Doumert. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So Erin and I met. We're actually in a mastermind together from Beth Weinstein. However, when I first started this conversation with Erin, I actually didn't know that we were in the group together. So
Oh,
it was really funny when I was like, "Hey, wait a minute, that's Erin."
yeah, I think
Um, yeah. So, but we started having this really interesting conversation that I wanted to bring out into a bigger forum, which is about trauma in the psychedelic space, and specifically dealing with trauma, and also avoiding further trauma or re-traumatization. So before we get into that, Erin, why don't you just share with the audience like a little bit about your background and how you got to where you're at today professionally?
yeah. Such a long, crazy story, right? I think all of our story is kind of similar in how we even ended up in this space. Um, I've been using psychedelics for healing can you hear me okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Been using psychedelics for the last 13 years, for healing. I was in a, codependent, toxic relationship, ending a divorce in 2008 when the whole world is crumbling. And my brother uh, gave me some psychedelics and some mushrooms, went out to Lake Havasu and was like, I think you would really benefit from this. So I had a really beautiful experience, really coming home to myself, feeling more confident within myself and truly knowing who I am. throughout the years, I found myself in the rave scene, going to raves and having these amazing healing sessions in the middle of the dance floor, just like, whoa, this is so beautiful. And, back then you didn't really talk about it in the public. So couldn't really describe to people the experiences I was having. Um, but they were just so powerful. Then there was a tragic thing that happened in our family. In 2017, my brother overdosed on heroin, and I had known and heard about ibogaine at that time. So I gathered my whole family together, and we took him down to Mexico, and he had an ibogaine experience. And he also did 5-MeO DMT, which I didn't know what 5-MeO was at that time. Um, since then he's been sober since that one ibogaine experience, but really it was the 5-meo DMT that opened me up to so much more. My mother and I went down to Mexico and had this 5-meo experience, and we had like healed so much generational trauma with each other and within the family, and ended up finding my whole family, my mom, my dad, and all my siblings together in ceremony at some point, really healing with each other. um, and I knew that there was something so much bigger here. I was like, okay, owned a hair salon in La Jolla at the time, and I was describing to clients and my staff and all these people how beautiful these were. So I used to cater women down to Mexico to have these 5-MeO experiences. And it was just it was just so beautiful, these ceremonies that we were having. So um, I knew there was something more. I was a very successful hairstylist in La Jolla. I was helping women feel confident on the outside, but I knew that I wanted to help on the inside as well. And I knew that psychedelics was like a really great tool to use in conjunction with this deep work. So I sold my hair salon. I quit doing hair, and now I am a full-time psychedelic integration coach.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's quite a journey.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, just because of your experience, because I often find when people talk about using ibogaine, especially in the context of curing addiction, that it's coupled with the 5-MeO DMT. Do you have any insight or like personal opinion about why those two medicines go so well together?
I don't. I actually have never done ibogaine before, so I'm not really sure why they do that, but I have heard that it just like ties the whole experience together. I know of some facilitators that will do ayahuasca and then end it with 5-MeO as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm not really sure about like the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, because I have a friend, actually the person that facilitated my 5-MeO journey for the first time. She had a similar experience where she went to Mexico to be able to get off of heroin and had an ibogaine experience. And then, the 5-MeO was sort of like an afterthought. But I think it's really fascinating not knowing too much about ibogaine itself, like why those two medicines are always paired up. Seems kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, it is really, really interesting.
How would you how would you like say the integration for 5-MeO? Um, like how is that experience for you? Because for those who don't have any experience with it, like 5-MeO, I would consider to be one of the most, let's say, like extreme um, of the psychedelics. Like it definitely goes from 0 to 100 really quickly, whereas some other medicines are a little bit more gentle in their approach. 5-MeO for me, it was like a complete dismantling of who I thought I was as a person, as a ego, as Jonathan, and then sort of as you come back, sort of putting those pieces back together in this really interesting way.
Yeah, I think that finding, integrating 5-MeO, it starts with preparation always. I work for a really beautiful retreat center down in Mexico with some facilitators down there with 5-MeO, and I help those participants integrate. So I'm really familiar with the integration process of 5-MeO, and I feel like the process of integrating it is really just bringing those pieces back together and becoming whole, but building the practice of staying within that spiritual practice, spiritual container, that spiritual energy that you felt of like being whole and being with one, and knowing that we are all part of the earth and part of the plants. And the sense of being one. I know a lot of the participants, when they come back, their meditation practice is really strong. It's really, really strong. They like are dived into it. They like um their journaling is also equally as strong. And so really what it comes back to is like what was shown for you within that psychedelic space, and pairing it with like I have guided meditations or guided embodiment journeys to really help facilitate or like ground into those teachings that were brought to the medicine space. Because so many of us are like, okay, boundaries came up in my medicine space, but how do I create a boundary? What does it even mean? So many of us don't even understand. I mean, I know I didn't. I had no boundaries when I first started doing this work. My energy was all over the place. So it's about like coming back home to myself and knowing who I am, and finding that self-confidence.
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing about that particular medicine is that even though it's such a brief experience in that space, it can be really long lasting, in terms of the effects that it has on a person, even like the reactivations that can occur. And like you said, keeping an intentionality about, your experience and really trying to like bring your experience back into your waking life, can really help that process of like, okay, like what's going to stick here, what's going to remain with me, and how is it changing me as a person.
Yeah. And I want to like circle back to the preparation. I think that's everything. I didn't know preparation when I went into this type of work. And since now I do, but I actually had a reactivation with 5-MeO DMT, and I did get re-traumatized in that space. And it was very traumatic and traumatizing, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to turn to. And I think it's really important that we are aware that these spaces can re-traumatize people if we're not fully prepared and understand how to journey in these spaces.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more. So in terms of preparation for, doing plant medicine work, what are some best practices or what are some things that people should be aware of?
For preparation, I always like to, obviously we've all heard the set and setting. I think that one is always something that is a foundation within this work to come back to. Like, what is your mindset? What is your setting? Who is your facilitator? Where are you at? Um, those are the most important. Not only that, but then the skill set. How do you journey? What are you doing inside that journey space? I know for me, like when I teach people how to prepare, I teach them a set of tools. It's almost like having a backpack full of tools with them. So when they are in journey space, they know what to do. They know how to uh, yeah, ground in themselves, and I really prepare them for any like scenario that may come up. And also, I want to make sure the person's nervous system is regulated. Like, do they already have a well-regulated nervous system? So many, I know for myself, I was stuck in like the fight flight scene, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I was like already so like pent up. My nervous system was unregulated, so I don't think I was a good candidate at that time to go into that space. And my setting was also not secure as well. So there was many factors that ended that contributed to my re-traumatization. So I really um, focus on, preparation. How do you journey? How's your nervous system? Were you recently traumatized? Where are you at right now in your life? Have you had a recent grief? If you are going through like a big transition in your life, it's probably not the best time. Not saying that you can't eventually, but these are all factors into what can happen in these spaces. I always like to do what like a titrated approach in helping people, meaning like I will start off with like microdosing or doing small doses and regulating our nervous system within that space to see, so you can have like an introduction into the medicine space and learn how to regulate your nervous system through that, and then building, titrating up from there. And that's really, the SC work. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. You know, we do that with so many other things in life, right? Like if you use the example of exercise or lifting weights, or even the way that we teach children in school, you don't throw a kid in elementary school into a calculus class, right? You teach them
Yeah.
arithmetic and then multiplication and algebra. There's skills that build upon each other before you get into these really big concepts.
Yeah.
And I think that doing that in expanded states of consciousness um, is really wise. I had a friend here in Tucson that owned um, a like flotation center, for sensory deprivation floating, and she would always recommend it to people before they were going to do journey work, do plant medicine work, and her like the logic behind that was like, well, before you like put on a rocket pack and like blast off into the cosmos, like you should just check in with yourself and see if you can like spend an hour or two just with yourself without any distractions, just with your own mind and body. And like it's a good preparation. It's a good way to check in with yourself and have just a good barometer of where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some ways that you recommend to people to like help regulate their nervous system?
Yeah. I, for folks who, one of the biggest challenges I always try to offer to people is go outside without your phone, without any podcasts, without any music, without anything, and just walk around the block, connecting to your breath, and just take a look at your surroundings and see what you see and feel what you feel. Even just that, just walking around your neighborhood with just yourself can really be good start. It's a really good start. Of course, there's breath work people can get into. I really enjoy taking like deep, like I don't know if there's a specific name for it, but breathing in for a count of four, pause for a count of four, and relax for a count of eight.
Yeah.
Those are really great ways to uh, regulate our automatic nervous system. And yeah, and working with a somatic practitioner like myself, I'm able to like gauge where, a client is, and if I can see that somebody has a lot of anxiety or a lot of stress, sometimes going for a walk around the block may cause more anxiety. So I always like to be mindful and like meet the client where they're at and see what works, uniquely curated for them.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of like really key points there, especially in regards to the breath. Um, so as we extend our exhale, as we make that exhale longer than our inhale, we're sending signals through our vagus nerve to the autonomic nervous system, basically like signaling our body that it's safe to relax, it's safe to go into our rest and digest system, our parasympathetic, rather than being in our fight or flight. So, that just in and of itself is kind of a hack as we start to, breathe deeper and slower, just remembering to trying to extend that exhale. And then the other thing that you touched on that I really like is, just it sounds like almost taking an audit, like can you like we've become so dependent on our phones, on distractions, on things constantly sort of keeping us from being present. Can you like put that phone down and just go out into your natural environment? Like sort of ancestrally. We're not used to living outside, but this is where we came from, right? And
Mhm.
just see like what happens. What goes on in your body. What senses start to come alive. What sort of sensations start to come up, um, good or bad. And just noticing what's happening, because within the plant medicine work that you're going to do, all of that stuff is going to be magnified, 100-fold, right? So I love that first step of like, hey, let's just start to disconnect and reconnect inwardly, and just check in to see where you're at.
Mhm.
um, what other things can people do to prepare? I think when you say re-traumatizing, do you think that there's a difference between like people with intention that are going into journey work, like kind of to deal with a trauma, or that they know that they have like a history of trauma, versus somebody that like might be discovering something like in that medicine space?
Yeah, I think it's also really important to define what trauma is and why it is so important. So, trauma is anything that a survivor stores within the body. It isn't the event itself, it's how our nervous system reacted to it. And that can happen, even just being born is traumatic, like uh, pre-verbal, a lot of pre-verbal, there's a lot of pre-verbal trauma that can happen within, our nervous system, or we had a traumatic experience and cognitively we understand it and we made sense of it. We worked with a therapist or whatever, and we're like, okay, I know the trauma, I understand it, I see how it worked, I see how this, but the nervous system is still, it still remembers, the body still remembers. Even before we can verbally talk about what happened, our body still remembers. And every single person is, I mean, I'm pretty sure most humans walking this earth, unless you're a Buddha or something, is traumatized. So going into these spaces, it's really important to understand what happens with the body in traumatized events, right? So like somebody who got in a really bad car accident, and you get in a car accident, and normally what happens in the wild, I'm going to back up a little bit. I think I'm all over the place. So, what happens in the wild when an animal is traumatized or being chased? They lay in the middle of the field and they start shaking, and their body and their automatic nervous system is releasing the trauma from their body. But what happens when we get into a car accident or something traumatic happens to us? We're embarrassed, we're scared, we don't want to cry, we don't want to scream because, our society has told us to, not process these things. So what happens is you like get out your phone and you're exchanging phone numbers or insurance companies or whatever, but yet your nervous system's still like, wait, we didn't process this. And so usually what happens in these spaces, right? So like people who are in car accidents, their body might go like this in psychedelic space, and we're like trying to like release those, like uh, complete the trauma cycle is what we're doing. We're allowing our bodies to go into that space, release the, oh man, my vocabulary, here we go.
The
Re-
energy that's there.
yeah, release the energy, thank you. And then come back out into a parasympathetic nervous system. So when during the during my preparation process, I go through all of these things, like what can happen, and to not to resist it. Because when we resist it, it's making it worse. And when we resist something, sometimes we end up re-traumatizing because we're resisting it. We're not allowing the full trauma cycle to be complete. So that's basically what happened to me in my psychedelic experience. I was resisting it. I ended up being stuck in the fight flight stage, and I didn't allow the cycle to complete.
So then when you're in those places, what are some things that someone could do to kind of help complete that cycle? You mentioned shaking. I know
Yeah.
that that's something like for me, like um, I started to notice that, after I started to do somatic work, that my leg would shake, not specifically like while I was doing the somatic work, but sometimes, especially with cannabis, which I thought was like really
Mm.
like interesting. Um, and it happened this one time, like I was thinking about a particular memory with a family member that wasn't too pleasant, and I noticed that like I started to shake, and instead of like you're saying, like avoiding it, sort of calling it off, or walking away from it, I really used the opportunity to like lean into it. And I noticed that like the thought and the emotions that were kind of coupled with that thought, um, kept
Yeah.
getting stronger and stronger, right? And it was going along with the shaking, and then as the shaking kind of died down, um, like I felt a lot better. And what I remembered, all of a sudden, I like put these two things together, was like I remembered being, like an adolescent and doing this shaking thing with my leg.
Yeah.
And I would do it like unconsciously. It was something that I felt like I could sort of like jumpstart, and then it would sort of play itself out. And I would say over the last couple of years, like I've really learned to resource myself with that, being meaning that like when like I can tap into that function, that shaking, and release, um, energy that way, release like anxiety that I have in my body. And it's really interesting because it's like I can still jumpstart it, but I can't just continue to do it. Like once it's discharged, I can't like start it again. I might come back to it a couple of days later or a week later, something like that. And I know that there are, specific schools like trauma release exercises that, really like teach people how to resource themselves in that way. For myself, it was this realization of like, oh wow, like this is something that I've done unconsciously to release trauma
Hmm.
ever since childhood.
Yeah.
But I'm interested, like in what are some other resources that people could kind of use in those spaces.
Yeah. I love this question. I tell people to get primal. This is a primal
Mm,
space. Like dig deep, like as if you're giving birth to yourself. You're giving birth to you're like getting unstuck, getting unparalyzed, and you're birthing your new self. You're birthing your new purpose. You're like understanding what has been holding you back. And that can look like roaring or screaming or crying or laughing. So many of us are afraid to laugh or be really silly, whatever wants to come out. I really truly encourage the participants to just be however you want to be. And that's why it's so important to have a safe space with somebody who's non-judgmental, someone who can like really be there with you in your most vulnerable time and your most insecure time. So yeah, shaking the body is one. Um, Going down and doing like moving the body even and just like dancing around, um, can really get unstuck to get out what's been keeping you paralyzed, things like that.
I love that. Yeah, like within breath work, that's also what I encourage my clients to do is like two of the best ways to like move that energy or either through the actual movement itself and making sound. Like, and I always encourage people to make sound, and it's always kind of funny because like I'll do it in the beginning of the session. I'll be like, now just to try it out, like just make whatever sound your body wants to make like right now and just let it be as expressed as it wants to be. And usually it's just me up there like going and like all this room full of people just kind of staring at me. But when people are able to like really lean into that, it's such a good way to move that energy and like actually get it out, move it to completion, like you said.
Yeah, complete the there's the trauma vortex and the counter vortex. I'm going to get super nerdy or scientific. I don't mean to, but we have this stream of life. And sometimes when a traumatic experience happens, we go into a trauma vortex. But then, sometimes people get stuck in that trauma vortex and we don't know how to get out. And so we want to come out into the counter vortex. And I think it's just so powerful. Like, yeah, like you said, just use your voice. Let's just make any noise you want or move around in any way you want. And it's really, really powerful.
Well, and I think to kind of stay on sort of the nerdy, place, you know, it sounds like what you're describing is, kind of a state of being frozen, right? And if we're talking about the nervous system, if we're talking about the polyvagal theory, our nervous system is a ladder. So in order to like get unfrozen, we have to go through the fight or flight. We can't just go from frozen to like normal. We really have to like fight or flight our way out of it. And so how are we going to do that? We can make noise, we can move, we can utilize that energy, but like we have to do something to get from that frozen state into, back into like a regulated rest and digest kind of place. So I really appreciate, the simplicity of it. Like it sounds simple. Okay, like yeah, make noise or move around. But these things are like you saying like are primal, and they can be so powerful just having the freedom to express ourselves in whatever way we need to, like a child, right? Like a child, when you watch a child playing, they're not judging themselves, they're not worried about like what you think of their play, how they're, what they're doing. They're just being fully expressed. And as we get older, as we start to, sort of put those parts away, we start to like forget about that just pure self-expression, right? Like we're worried about, um, you know, for, walking it off, sucking it up, man up, like you said, just be, or even like you said with the example of the car accident, just being kind of consumed with the adult processes that you have to go through. Like you can't just get out of a car accident and be like, okay, like give me a second, I need to release some somatic energy. You've got to, get the person's insurance and, take pictures and deal with all the adult stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
There, I remember watching this somatic experiencing video this one time, and they were talking about the animal example that you gave earlier of, the gazelle that gets, getting chased by the lion and goes into this freeze state and then gets up after the danger is gone, shakes itself off and goes along in its day. And the example, I thought she was kind of being really funny with it. She said, you know, the gazelle doesn't go home and develop a drinking problem or like beat their partner or you know, like overeat. You know, it's just you completes and then it's done. And you know, there's a lot of wisdom that we can find from that like primal animal you know, process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to kind of wrap it up, what are, like, if somebody came to you like brand new, like what's one thing that they should definitely start doing for their preparation integration process? I mean, I'm sure that everybody is unique, right? Everybody has different modalities or practices that they're going to take to, but is there like one thing that you like always go to, like, okay, this is really important and I always recommend this?
I always recommend meditation. I think if you can really sit with yourself for an extended period of time, then you'll be able to get the most out of your psychedelic experience. Um, that's my go-to, definitely. Because before I started this work, I had no meditation uh, practice whatsoever. And it was interesting though, because the medicine space taught me how to meditate. So it's hard
Mm,
to like say how to prepare for it because it's really unique for every single person. But really, you know, if I knew how to meditate going into my first space, I probably would have gotten a lot more out of it. But, you know, my first lesson was how to meditate. But if you already know how to meditate, then you'll get to your next lesson. So I think that meditation is such a huge um, yeah, meditation is great. I love it. I meditate twice a day now. And
awesome.
yeah, I'm like the grumpiest person if I don't meditate. But
Well, I actually agree with you. Like meditation is definitely one of, you know, one of my go-tos, and mindfulness is like for sure something that I like always try to work on with people. And I think that there's a sort of another aspect of recommending people start a mindfulness practice is like practicing mindfulness, developing a meditation practice can help you tune out or like be able to move past some of the noise that's just happening in our background, right? But I think it also is going to highlight the areas that really do need attention, you know, like the bigger things. Like there's that, you know, sort of analogy within meditation of like muddy water, right? And if you allow the water to settle, all the dirt and mud go to the bottom and the water is basically clear. But as the dirt, as that mud kind of settles, you're also going to be able to see like the rocks and the things that, you know, that aren't going to settle to the bottom, that might be hidden if all the time, you know, if your water is muddy all the time. So
mhm.
like I love mindfulness just for the clarity that it can show you about like, oh, here's this other anxiety that's not really getting helped by my meditation practice, or here's these thoughts or memories that are coming to the surface, or kind of recurring, that maybe you're shining a light on an area that you know, deeper medicine work will help with. So yeah, I agree with you. Like meditation is really a foundational practice, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, a thought came to my head and then it disappeared. Um, Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, because 95% of our brain is unconscious, and that is what is steering the boat. And if we're constantly being distracted and looking at other things and we're stuck and I know for myself, I was like looking for my purpose. I was looking for what, I wanted to do in my life, but I was just so much distraction that once I started doing this work and being mindful and like that, I love that analogy with the mud and like letting that all go, it you open up a whole new thing of, like you said, what wants to be worked on, what wants to be cleared away, what's our next lesson, in this life.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Erin, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you, or if they want to work with you?
Yeah, they can go onto my website, erindoumert.com, which is literally just my name.com. I even have a free resource on there if you're looking to microdose. There's actually 5 different psychedelics that can be microdosed. I know so many people think it's just psilocybin, but there are for others. So you can go in there, get a free gift, know what other types of psychedelics that are able to be microdosed.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
everybody should check that out, especially if you are new to the microdosing scene.
Yeah.
I was trying to like list off all 5 in my mind. I'm like, let's see.
Yeah.
So
I'll let
I
you
will definitely, yeah, I'll definitely be checking that out too.
know. Thank you, Jonathan, so much for having me and having this chat. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and look forward to continuing to get to know you through the mastermind
Yeah,
program.
same. All right.
Awesome.
Take
Have a
care.
good afternoon. Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the podcast. I hope that you not only enjoyed it, but that you feel inspired to go and do some practice of your own. Whether that is something that is a part of your regular routine, like meditation or breath work, or trying something new, like taking an ice bath or starting a new mindset practice. Maybe you feel curious to something that you've been called to try, working with a new teacher, a new facilitator, or maybe even working with psychedelics or plant medicine in whatever way is safe and legal for you where you live. My hope is that you are, curious and continue to expand your transformational practice, and that this podcast inspires you to continue doing that. As always, if you can follow or subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, it definitely helps. And if you can leave a review, even just a few reviews really help to push the podcast up in the algorithm and help make it more visible to more people. I'd love it if you shared it with your friends if you're finding it valuable or interesting. As always, follow me at Blue Magic Alchemy on Instagram, all one word. And if you're interested in learning more about breathwork, or you'd like support integrating or preparing for self-development and transformational practice, reach out to me at bluemagicalchemy@gmail.com or at Instagram to set up a discovery call for Instagram coaching. Until next time, thank you, be well, and keep practicing. That's the vital point.